So,
Well,
yeah, I guess
yeah,
Nevin, if you want to open.
sure. I'll kick things off and then I'll quickly turn things over to Eric. Hi, I'm Nevin French. I'm the OOA president. And on behalf of the OOA board, we'd like to welcome everyone to this Technique for Advanced Course Setters. We're really, really pleased with the turnout and especially the range of people who have signed up. There's people quite new to orienteering and adventure racing, and there's some savvy veterans of the sport as well. So we're really pleased. And then more than anything, we'd like to really thank Eric, who put his hand up, approached us saying that he'd like to build on the webinar that Mike Waddington did last year on course setting, and we're honored to have this. Also, thank Orienteering Canada for the use of their Zoom. Want to quickly ask everyone to please mute your line, and we'd suggest you to have your camera off during this, just to allow people to focus on Eric's presentation. And also, if you can put your questions or comments in the chat, but we'll probably save most of those for Q&A at the very end. 2024 is already an awesome year for orienteering. TOC had the O Cup final in Ontario here last week. We had athletes racing in the Pig and West Point recently. There's the Don't Get Lost Giants Rib Raid coming up, the Challenge to Shield, and then the big Canadian and North American championships this summer that TOC and Ottawa are hosting, also in Kingston. One thing that we're going to build on last year, the webinar with Mike Waddington, we really kind of got into the difference between just having your Orienteering Canada level of officialdom versus really being a great course setter. And that just takes a lot of skill. It takes practice. And Eric, I think, is going to get into some of the tricks of the trade. And one of the things that I really encourage people is to talk to elite runners like Eric to get feedback on courses. People like Eric look at the terrain and these courses in a different way than many people, and I think brings a lot to that process. Um, Great course setting is kind of the core of what we really enjoy doing in the woods. And every event, I'd say, is a lot better with that much better of a course. It can be a really nice surprise in a local event, but it's an absolute must for the big events. If we're expecting racers to fly across the country, we have to deliver the best possible course. And great course setting can be either a really challenging long leg in an adventure race or an incredibly technical short leg on a university campus. They all count. So with that, I'd like to introduce Eric Kemp, longtime member of the Ottawa Orienteering Club, who's been racing with Team Canada for around 15 years and has gone to 12 World Championships. Eric is known as one of the absolute best technical orienteers in North America. He's someone that when he comes back to the woods, you know that he has almost always run a clean race and can handle the toughest challenges that course setters can throw at him. He's also fast becoming one of Canada's leading mappers and especially well known as a manipulator of LiDAR. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Eric and really looking forward to this. So thanks very much.
Great, and thank you, Nevin. Yeah, so last year, Mike Waddington hosted his talk on deconstructing course setting, and at the end of that, there were some questions. One of them about control placement, and it got me thinking that there's so many more things that I would just love to talk about. And so I sort of ruminated for a while and put together this presentation. And now, yeah, I'm really excited to share with you guys. So thanks for coming out, and let's get right into it. So I'm a big believer in as orienteering organizers, the orienteering experience of our participants is really, in a sense, the product that we're delivering. And there's a few components of that. Um, the map being the sort of main tool, but then also the courses, which are like doesn't matter how good the map is, uh, if you're gonna have troubles if there are flaws in your course setting. And advanced course setting in particular um, is difficult. I mean, there's nothing easy about this sport. So at all levels, mapping, course setting, and participating. But that's why we love it so much. Um, so I'm just going to kind of quickly review some of the details that Mike covered, um, just to um, cover our bases here. According to the rules, a course should be enjoyable, mentally and physically challenging, different map reading styles, route choice should be involved, variation, switching gears, won by the best orienteer on the day, have fair control locations, um, the map must be accurate, or as ideally as accurate as possible, and the fastest route should be challenging and rewards those who execute well. Now, um, that's all well and good, but how do you pull that off? Um, as from a very high level, the organizer will first pick the terrain that's suitable, pick an arena, and then in terms of the order of decision making, they will, as Mike suggested, you really want to make sure that you've got a trail network for the kids. There's good terrain that's accessible for the masters, and you've got enough material to work with to satisfy the elites as well. This is for like an A-meet level or higher that I'm talking about. But I mean also for the B-meet level. Uh, and so then from there, the general kind of advice that we often hear is set long legs first. And then Mike had kind of an innovative approach where he identified the zones for rough and precise orienteering, and then stressed the importance of testing your long legs, making sure that they're working the way that they're supposed to. Um, and then from there, you kind of sketch out a rough draft of your course and identify the weaknesses and iterate. But how do we produce that rough draft? I felt like we kind of glossed over some of the finer details last time, and so that's really where I'm going to try to where I plan to go with this presentation. Um, my personal approach is start by trying to solve the hard problems first. So every race has a finish, and that's going to be in a concentrated zone around the arena. Maybe you have a spectator that is also passes through the arena. And so wherever that location is going to be, it's going to get a little crowded with the course because there's a lot of coming and going. And if you want the course to flow nicely and to be challenging throughout that whole section, you kind of need to prioritize it maybe above some of the other parts of your course. And that's where solving the hard problems first comes in handy, because if you've got a good plan for how you're going to do the arena passage and how you're going to bring people in, funnel people into the finish, then everything's going to fall into place. Whereas if you start by planning the start first and then end up at the finish, you're going to kind of shoehorn yourself into an ugly situation at the end, and your course is going to start strong but end weak. And that's going to be kind of anticlimactic, and you're also wasting the power of the end of the course, which is, like extra stressful and exciting, and it's got its own, twists and turns. Um, and then also distance and climb limitations. That's depending on your terrain type, that's gonna uh, play a big part in where you put your start location and how you lay out your course and whatnot. Then yeah, start location, it needs to be appropriately distanced, and it's a very remote starts is a very powerful tool. I like using them a lot for my courses. And I mean, you can more or less set the start location anywhere within like 2 kilometers, or depending on um, how willing you are to push it. The Swedes at O-Ringen will send us out in the like 3.5, 4 kilometers sometimes. So the limits can be stretched pretty far. Um, but and yeah, remote starts also are useful for sometimes it's difficult just because of the lay of the land to reach certain locations, and you can use that start triangle, just kind of plopping it somewhere convenient to open up a corridor. And I'll show you an example of that later. And so then once you have sort of your finish to start and any choke points, spectator leg, kind of roughly, you've got an idea of how it's all going to work out, then you can kind of fill in the in-betweens. So in 2022, I was the course setter for the Ottawa O-Fest, and I was in charge of the setup and the western half of the chase. Here you can see the competition map that we were using. Walking through the steps that I just described, you can see that we had picked our 2 arena locations, and we had a remote start for both days, and the east side of the map was strategically reserved for the chase. And so my challenge was to set basically a middle distance in this quite tight space on the west half of the map, but it's good terrain, lots of detail. And the reason why the start is where it is so that we don't have to send people into that far west corner and then back out again, because they would be kind of doubling back through an area that they've already been. So that was a very convenient way of just kind of like getting everyone to the west side of the map right away, and then they could loop around and then back to the middle arena through the course. So that was the rationale there. So moving along through the process, I drew up Mike's little bubbles and identified the areas where we intended on having groups of controls with precision navigation, and then the blue zones is where there was going to be more route choicey. And so yeah, I talked about first the west loop, and then the remote start solved the bottleneck coming out of that corner, and then the intent was to move north up to the ridge line, and then south again down to the detailed area in the southeast, and then that area in particular, you can see from the map that it's quite subtle, a gentle slope with a bunch of parallel rock features, and also the forest there is lower visibility. So I my hunch was that people were gonna find it very interesting and challenging in there. And I really expected that to be kind of the crux of the course. There are also no trails for the most part. And so that was going to be like a really critical piece. And then because the arena was right there, we could have a spectator leg and a final loop into the finish. Now, here's the final result. And you can see all the ingredients that I described. 4.7 kilometers. I was really happy with the result. And the feedback was super positive after the race. Everyone had a really good time. But how did I get from the bubbles to this completed course? Um, so it's an iterative process, and I'll uh, discuss all of the iterations. Um, so some of the questions I want to answer: how do you select control locations? How do you set up route choices? How do you make sure that the course is fair and fun for everyone? And how do you make sure that it's a proper elite orienteering course? Um, so in order to set a proper challenging course, I think it's important to establish what does that actually mean? Like when we say, oh, that orienteering was really challenging, and uh, challenging in a good way. Because there are many times people go and they're kind of like scratching their head, like, oh, that was challenging, but not, you know, because it was challenging for all the wrong reasons. So we want to avoid all those. Um, and the most common pitfalls that I see are like sending people into really gnarly terrain um, with the idea that it is making the course more difficult, which it is, but nobody is going to thank you for that. And then luck and fairness concerns. And now these are two map snippets inspired by courses that I've run in the past. Um, and yeah, classic examples of what can go wrong despite the best of intentions. Um, hidden flags in particular, and the bottom of pits. I really like um, hunting for pits when the map is accurate and the pits are significant and um, easy to find once you arrive. But it's also it's an easy thing to mess up as well. So um, yeah, just be careful about that. I see people make those two mistakes pretty often. Um, so yes, to answer the question, what makes good challenging orienteering? Um, I broke it down into sort of four ingredients that I typically um, play with when I'm course setting. Variation, route choice, risk, and pressure. And these are all all things that you can control with the way you set the course. Um, so variation. What do I mean by variation? Um, oh, there are sort of three ways that I could think of to use variation while setting an orienteering course. One was varying the terrain, which we talk about often. Pictured here is a course I ran in Uppsala. And you can see that leg 6 to 7, and it goes from the north to the east there. Oh, well, and in fact, 5 to 6 as well. It goes from very detailed, actually kind of Canadian Shield-esque terrain into some very vague, boggy marshland, and then some quite dense green. And I mean, this is it's not the elite course, but it is the men's 21 course, so it is very high level. Um, and um, and so a great example of variation actually being used by the Swedish course setters for O-ringen. And then you can see the course then swings back into, there's a long leg to 7, and it kind of swings back into into the technical terrain. So they're really playing with both the terrain, but also leg length here. And you can see the short little legs, and they're switching gears from one to the other. And also the style of orienteering that's going to be required to get through the different sections of the course. So route choice, the next ingredient for generating challenging orienteering. This is a long leg that I set in the Yukon when I was training there. And we don't get long legs like this in North America that often. Uh, and it was a treat to run. I mean, incredible terrain, obviously. Um, and the yeah, like a classic advanced long leg, you want to stretch it out generally as far as you can. But obviously it still has to uh, have all the ingredients required to make a good route choice leg. So in this case, like I've drawn in some of the different options. There's more micro route choice options that you could take, I'm sure. But yeah, just one example of a Canadian terrain being used with a very much elite level course setting style. But Lose Lake is an incredible terrain, so it's easy to set a difficult course, a challenging course in this terrain. But what are some of the things we can keep in mind? Offering multiple options, deviations, as in the different options can be small or they can be large. I think when we take the course setting workshops, at least here in Canada, we talk a lot about like providing a left route choice and a right route choice and a center route choice. But there's a lot, I think that's a bit of a reductive way of thinking about route choice legs. In my opinion, what you're really looking for is a spread of runners. It doesn't have to be necessarily left, center, right, as much as just not one clear way to execute the leg. There are options. The other thing that I think that we miss quite often with route choice legs is the quickest route should be navigationally the hardest. Um, Mike talked about it a little bit, but this I think is often missed when uh, we're setting our uh, competitions, our big competitions. There's sort of an enthusiasm for creating the route choice options, but then we lose the um, the prioritization of the navigation, which um, is the most important part of the sport. Um, so I just wanted to really highlight that particular aspect of long legs. And in order to actually succeed on to ensure that that is the case, it's important to um, probably to test your long legs, and really think about the balance between the different options, the trails, the um, speed of the terrain. It's a balancing act, and it's hard to get right. Um, then we talked a little bit last time about setting long legs early and middle distances. For fairness reasons, it's important that, if you're going to throw everyone into a route choice off the bat, that at the very least they should be familiar with the terrain. For an A-meet, that means that probably you shouldn't do that unless the middle is on the second day. It occurred to me that there have been a few big events where they totally sent us off into the deep end right away. One of those being the middle quali in Finland in 2013, where half of the elites of the world got brutalized by this first long leg that was just insanely difficult. Um, and then also recently at the California O Festival, our course, the first leg was just kind of a short-ish leg, and then they hit us with a long route choice leg right away. So it's not necessarily the case that course setters are holding their punches on middle distances when it comes to throwing long legs early. But those big events also have model events, so at least on paper, everyone should be familiar with the terrain enough to make the correct decisions to get through that first part of the course. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting observation. Um, and then, of course, the stun grenade um, long distance, where you just hit everyone with a super long route choice right off the bat, and they're just kind of like, oh, okay, got to figure this out now. And yeah, also highlighting once again that if you're going to set a route choice leg, you really need to make sure that the map is correctly conveying the information, and like testing all of the different options that you're offering. Because if somebody ends up taking one of the route choices and then it turns out that, there's a huge beaver pond that's flooded since the last time the map was field checked, then it's a bad situation. Um, so yeah, as I mentioned, the one of the questions from last time, do you set technical detailed legs with difficult control sites? And I looked up the IOF guidelines on this, and there were a couple of takeaways that I thought were interesting. Um, in the guidelines, it expressly says the courses should be as difficult as the terrain permits, whatever that means. More specifically, middle distances emphasize detailed navigation where finding the controls constitute a challenge. Okay, we kind of are familiar with that. Requires constant concentration with the map for the whole course. Okay, yeah. But now what about longs? They should emphasize route choice in demanding terrain. The controls are not necessarily difficult to find, but in parts, the course can include characteristics of a middle distance where the runner has to suddenly break away from route choice orienteering and into more technically demanding navigation. So, in my own personal course setting journey, I find that my mentality when I'm sitting down to set a middle versus a long isn't that different. Um, the biggest difference is because a long course is longer, you can set more long route choice legs, and that is the intent. But otherwise, the goal is always to just make the course as challenging as possible. And middle distances now, as Mike highlighted last time, are we kind of expect them to have route choice legs in them, long legs in them. And so in both cases, you're setting long legs, you're setting technical short legs. You're mixing it up. I think the biggest difference for me is that longs are they're uh, obviously they're just more physically demanding. And the middle, you've got your goal as the course setter is to keep a tight chokehold on the athletes as much as possible so that if um, they have to just keep on navigating the whole way around. Whereas in the long distance, inevitably, as you send them on these long legs, they're going to have a little bit more room to kind of stretch their legs. And yeah. So I pulled up the long distance from Norway, and I've highlighted a few sections that I thought were interesting that kind of demonstrated some of the IOF recommendations. Here you can see in the beginning of the course, um, they the walk athletes are coming around through quite a vague section through 4, 5, 6 short legs. That could easily be part of the middle distance course. The controls look very scary to find, quite vague terrain. And um, and then there's a long leg 6 to 7, but it ends um, in a very technical zone around 7. So um, to answer Jim's original question, I would say that yes, you can totally set long legs through technical terrain and put the control in a technical area. If we're to take the world champs as any indication for what is allowed. And Also, the follow-up controls 8, 9 are quite are extremely technical. And yeah, to my kind of conclusion from earlier, this could easily be part of a middle distance course, I feel like. Although the long leg isn't super middle distancey, but you could totally get away with that, I think. Yeah. And then later on the course, um, similar ideas. 11 to 12 is very technical. 12 to 13 is a route choice leg. But I want to highlight the type of route choice leg we're looking at here. So um, there are, you can see there's sort of a right option. I'm talking 12 to 13. There's a bit of an indistinct trail that goes through the clearings. The thing that struck me actually right off the bat about this leg that I was kind of surprised was the massive trail right before Control 13. It's kind of it's like a huge catching feature right before the control, um, which normally I would personally avoid doing that if I was course setting. But who am I to question the Norwegian world champs course setters? Um, but I think maybe that's one of the differences between a long distance and a middle distance is that here the course setters are really highlighting the route choice, the route choicey aspect of this long leg. They're not worried so much about the runners having to stay in perfect contact all the way through to into the control because they've given them a giant trail right beforehand. So the challenge with this leg is really to execute the route choice itself, which I think is in line with the goal of um, the long distance. It is about the long legs and running hard and um, but even with the trail catching everyone at the end, there's still quite a technical approach into Control 13. I wouldn't say that that's like an easy control location by any means. So once again, there are no freebies at the World Champs. So I think, yeah, that's something to aspire towards as well. Now, if you pull up the routes of all the athletes who ran, you can see um, some people took the right route choice through the trails, but they were punished. They lost about 1 minute compared to the top guys who went straight or straight-ish. But I think what's interesting to note is the spread of tracks here. Like I was saying before, this is a route choice leg, but it's not really a left, center, right route choice. I mean, there is a right route choice, but that's a mistake if you take that one. It's more about going straight. But there's no one way to do the leg. And therefore there are options, and therefore it is a route choice leg. So it's a different kind of perspective. And it's a very technical, fun style of orienteering that I love, this type of course setting. And we don't always get it here, but it's always a joy when we do get it. At least for me. And it's something that I want to encourage, is these kind of route choice legs where there's not necessarily, it's not like a left, center, right thing. It's like a figure out how to get there and execute as cleanly as possible. And they gave the runners the trail right before the control, so it's not like, it doesn't quite feel like a middle distance like I was saying before. Um, but it is, yeah, it's a long leg, and that was happened in 2019 at the World Champs in Norway. So now, so we covered route choice, and the next ingredient to creating challenge in an orienteering course, risk. And I think oftentimes risk gets overlooked. And so I tried to break down some of the things, and this is something that I think about a lot when I'm course setting. Things that I'm looking for, I'm always looking for ways of increasing the risk that the runners are going through. And I'm on the lookout for things that are and avoiding things that are decreasing the risk. So things that I want to add to my course: low detailed areas, or inversely high detailed areas, low visibility terrain, elevation changes wherever possible, parallel features to confuse and discombobulate, and also factoring in fatigue at the end of the course, throwing in some tricky legs. We're all familiar with that technique. But I think what a lot of people miss as well are ways in which things can decrease the risk that runners have to overcome during the course. So, like, I see quite often there will be a nice leg that somebody's planned. Maybe it's route choicey, and they've done a good job of that. But then the control is sitting on or very close to a very obvious attack point. Maybe it's like a giant rock pillar, or um, uh, any number of things. Just something like very highly visible, and um, it immediately reduces the amount of risk required to complete the leg, which reduces the challenge of the course. And um, if your objective is to set an advanced orienteering course, then that's something you want to try to move away from. And we can talk about how to do that. The same thing goes for high visibility and sight lines. If you, for example, set your control at the top of a hill and the forest is super clear, people are going to be able to see that from a distance, and it reduces risk, reduces challenge. Same thing with catching features, handrails. Dog legs and loop backs reduce risk because people are coming in and out of the control, and they basically reveal the surprise of whether you're on the right track or not. And so that's best to be avoided. So how do you pick control locations? Keeping these ideas about risk in mind. Well, I was just talking about sight lines. Important ingredients to a good control location is can you put the flag there and will it be out of sight from the approach? Here you can see the beginning of the course for the O-Fest. I set the like 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you imagine yourself running those legs, one, the knoll is obscured behind the kind of rise. And so they're not going to be able to see that unless they intentionally attack from above, which fair. Number 2 is in a reentrant kind of around the corner through the green, so they're not going to see that in advance. Number 3 is up on the plateau on the other side of some green. So once again, that that control location will not be what I call telegraphed. And then same thing with 4 is it's on the down slope away from the runner, so they have to maintain accuracy right into the center of the control circle before they're going to hit that flag. And then same thing with 5, same thing with 6, same thing for basically every control. I try to ensure that the runners are left guessing right until the last possible second. And what that means is that the most confident will move the best through the forest and will be rewarded for their skill. Other important ingredients to a good control location is it shouldn't be a bingo, and don't bury them. And flow is really important. So I try to have obtuse angles as much as possible. And using little setup legs to get people away, especially if there's like if I've set a really beautiful long leg that goes into like a technical zone and I know it's going to be like a real make or break part of the course. I don't want people standing around that control location telegraphing for whoever's coming next that, oh, by the way, like it's right here. And doesn't matter that you like totally lost contact a minute ago when you left the trail or whatever, it's right here and you get this one for free. So get people out of there and try to get them to flow out so that they don't reveal your hard planned control locations. Now some interesting rules from the IOF. Controls where the accidental presence of another runner is a great help should be avoided. So these are the like pits that I was talking about earlier. If the flag is buried in a deep pit and you wander around a minute trying to find it, you finally find it, you go in, and then you pop out of the pit and your competitor has caught you in that time and sees you pop out of the pit, well, that was unfair. And so that was a bad control location, and those kind of scenarios should be avoided. And you can avoid that kind of thing by thinking about sight lines and ensuring that the location itself is obscured from the angle of approach. And something interesting that I wasn't aware of, for WRE events, they prefer that the number of controls shared between WRE courses and non-WRE courses is minimized. Because, I mean, obviously, if you've got like a bunch of elites coming into a control that's shared with a kids course for whatever reason, and the kids are just congregating around the control, that's not a fair scenario. So having some separation ensures a sort of an even playing field for the elites who are running at your event. Um, or the same logic could be applied to just advanced runners generally. If you're doing a B meet, I like to have a long advanced and an expert course offered, and I will separate control locations, especially if there's like a really cool leg that I want them to like really have to work all the way to the end to get it. I'll try to separate the different courses so that they're going to different control locations, and you can kind of see that at work pictured here. I've got Condes displaying all of the variants that went through this particular section, and you can see that the first leg is heavily forked between the top courses, 6, 7, and 8. They all have different controls, and that's just to ensure that yeah, you get good splitting, and that theme carries through um, to the rest of the course as well. But this would especially be important for like big competitions, any WREs that we're organizing. And I don't know how much people are actually thinking about this particular aspect. Like it's oftentimes that I'm running Canadian champs or North American champs, and there are lots of people around the controls. So I don't know if we're actually doing this or not. Um, but I thought it was interesting that they have an explicit rule about this and encourage separation. Um, Lines in the terrain. So there is a particular aspect of navigation that I think sometimes gets missed by course setters, and it's what I've come to refer to as lines in the terrain. And this is basically patterns or formations that can be used to navigate like a linear feature. The example I give here is a line of cliffs along a steep slope. This area was used for the O-Fest recently, and it's a very detailed, very complex area, but there are ways of simplifying the terrain, and this is one of the main ones. Looking for natural lines that kind of go through the um, the terrain, and you can use those to um, basically sort of point you in the right direction, as illustrated by the arrow pointing directly at number 5. So this is kind of an I just set this leg as an example of what I see sometimes from course setters. They'll set a course, but then they they don't really take into account the impact that the lines in the terrain have on the challenge of the course. For an experienced orienteer, you look at this and it's like extremely obvious how to get from 4 to 5. The line of cliffs, it's like a billboard that's just pointing straight at like where you need to go. And so to make it more challenging, you can take a different approach. What I like to do is when I'm course setting is identify the lines in the terrain, but then subvert them. Use them against the runners because their natural instinct is going to be to follow those lines in the terrain. So you can see pictured here, I've got the same leg, but now modified so that 5 to 6 cuts at an angle to the natural lines in the terrain. And as a runner attempts to run from 5 to 6, they are going to get pulled down that line, but now they're going to be going the wrong way instead of directly into the control as it was before. So it's going to be much more challenging for them, going to require much more control, and it's, in my opinion, more fun and more engaging orienteering all around. Um, and you can see I've drawn out a bunch of lines in the terrain that I would use if I was orienteering out there. And there are a lot of them all over the place. And if you're not kind of used to looking for them, then you might just, yeah, I mean, as Nevin was talking about, like people will read the terrain in different ways, and this is one of those ways that I feel like a lot of people miss. Um, Another aspect of lines into the terrain in the terrain that I see missed are tops of hills. So while in this example, the leg is going sort of with the line in the terrain, with the terrain, um, it's also very easy to go exactly perpendicular to the terrain, the lines in the terrain, because for example, if you've got a slope that has a sort of a horizontal line, but then perpendicular to that is the straight up and down, and that is also very easy to follow because we experience gravity. So we know which direction is straight down and we know which direction is straight up. And so by extension, whenever there's a hill, it's very easy to go to the top of that hill or straight down the hill. And so as a result, you can think of every hill as just like a bunch of lines that go down or up. And if you set a control on the top of one of those hills or around the top, it's going to be very straightforward to execute because you just climb the hill and you're there. And um, that's not very challenging. Um, so yeah, lines in the terrain, use them against people. And it's a lot of fun, both as a recipient and as a course setter to play with this particular element of the sport, I find. Here I've got included a picture of the new map in Kingston, and as well as some of the LiDAR base materials. And it's not super clear, but it's clear enough that you can kind of see the shapes and see how the lines that I've drawn, indicating lines in the terrain, match up with the actual terrain itself. Like they literally are linear formations that you can follow in the forest, and it's a very useful simplification technique. And as a course setter, um, here you can see a course that I set for a training camp, and notice how pretty much all the lines are always going at a diagonal to the lines in the terrain. This is the goal, and one of the things that every leg that I set, I'm always looking for these lines, and I'm always looking to create odd angles between my course and the lines in the terrain. and it will transform the level of challenge that your courses will deliver if you start doing this. And now we come to the fourth element of challenge, making challenging orienteering courses, and that is pressure, using pressure to increase the challenge. And there are kind of two ways of doing that that I deploy. One is using gravity, and I think there's an interesting psychological aspect to running downhill during an orienteering race. At least for me personally, there is sort of an increased pressure when I'm at the top of a hill, because you're not really physically limited anymore. You've got gravity on your side. You can go as fast as your feet can comfortably carry you through the forest. And that kind of creates this like impulse to go. And as a course setter, you can use that to kind of like gently push people over the edge, and basically by setting a sort of booby trap. For example, in this map snippet, I've got it goes 6, 7 in the 7 is in the southeast corner, and then 8 is the 7 to 8 goes northwest. And you've got like a nice route choicey leg there. And then they bomb down on the short leg, just visiting that corner of the terrain. And then to 10, 9 to 10 is basically a setup leg for the booby trap that I'm talking about, which is 10 to 11. And it starts at the teacup depression, and then you can see there's this gentle slope downhill. There are trails in the way, but critically, there's no trail like right before the control location. The boulder is out of sight because it's behind the hill. So there's no sight line to the flag. And yeah, it's downhill, and it's also notice that the slope goes from west to east, and I've set the leg so that it goes from the northeast to the southwest, so at a diagonal to the natural lines in the terrain. So as people are running this, they're naturally going to want to go downhill unless they have a very explicit compass bearing, in which case they'll veer left. Yeah, that's the deconstruction of that particular leg. The whole previous sort of 2 controls are just a setup for this one very specific leg that I really wanted in the course. And yeah, it was interesting. I was happy with how that worked out. So then another way of applying pressure with your course setting is weaving your courses together, essentially. And so you can see here the 3, we're moving further along the middle distance now. Um, and you can see the three different courses and the variations between the courses. And I mentioned earlier that this particular area is quite tricky. And um, my goal here was to create maximum chaos in this detailed zone, by basically sending everyone in there, but all looking for different control locations and all coming in at like a weird diagonals, and not being able to see the control locations in advance. And yeah, based on the feedback that I got from the participants, it worked brilliantly. It was uh, just total chaos. And in fact, there are a few veterans that came up to me afterwards and they said, "Oh, Eric, I don't make, I don't usually go fishing, but you got me on this one." And so, yeah, I was pretty happy with how this turned out. But yeah, you can see it kind of laid out right here. And I think the important thing to take away from this is how everyone is flowing in and out of this particular area. I've got all the course 6 and 7 participants. Well, everyone is coming from the north originally. And then the course 6 and 7 folks, they have their controls and then they kind of exit stage right. But the elites running course 8, they start coming in from the north, and then they have this kind of like medium long leg that crosses, goes right across the whole area to 14. And I knew that they would have to basically, they would have to penetrate through the crowds of sort of milling lost and confused participants looking from course 6 and 7, which would probably, unless they're very confident, would shake them up a little bit, in advance of having to find the boulder at 14. But also inversely, having the elites running from the north and then running through all the crowds, it would be like shooting bullets through a cloud of smoke. And it would just like increase the turmoil. And then I did it again on the way from 15 to 16, where the elites cross through that whole zone. They have to cross through that whole zone again, to catch 16 before exiting stage right 17 and 18. And so there you can see an example of playing the different courses off each other while also keeping a separation so that the control locations aren't being telegraphed, and basically everybody gets to enjoy like a very challenging crux of this middle distance race. Now, the spectator passage is, I don't know, it never gets easier. I've run a bunch of big events and they're always stressful. I actually, when I'm racing, I try to, I prepare myself in advance before I even get into the arena and just kind of brace for the rush of adrenaline and yeah, everything that just happens when you run through an arena. And here you can see me. I think I grabbed my map too tightly or something at the relay, and it got like stuck on the post, and I had to do like a quick turnaround or something. And but so naturally, I wanted to kind of capitalize on that same energy at the O Fest, and so I set a long distance, a long leg that kind of crossed through the arena. And Yeah, it was awesome. It worked really well, and it's also a switch in terrain. So I was layering the challenge, um, the levels of challenge by switching the terrain. It's a long leg with route choice, and it's a spectator leg, and it's diagonal to the lines in the terrain, and the control is in kind of a subtle area, although there is a trail nearby. And so this is where you start to take all the ingredients, and the goal is just to like stack as many layers of challenge on top of each other. And if you keep doing this throughout your course, then you get a really beautiful advanced orienteering course, advanced orienteering event. Um, Now, yeah, I just wanted to highlight again briefly because pressure, you feel extra pressure both um, at spectator legs, but also at the beginning of courses and at the end of the course. And yeah, that's something you can take advantage of as a course setter. And here I'm highlighting the California O-Fest North American Champs middle distance. I mentioned earlier that they set a long leg early in the course. Here it is. It's sort of a run-of-the-mill first leg, and then boom, this big side hill leg. And with nothing to save you around control two either. Like it's one big slope. There's clearings all over the place, boulders all over the place, parallel features galore. Super scary leg. Um, and yeah, a really interesting choice, I thought. And all made possible because they put the start triangle there so that they could just run everyone up to the onto the side of the hill, and then boom, hit them with this long leg. So yeah, the start triangle, remote start, very useful tool to pull these kind of tricks. And of course, ending the race. Um, Typically, like oftentimes you'll hear people just say, "Oh, just throw like a bunch of technical controls at the end of the course," because you're layering the levels of challenge once again. So like technical orienteering, extra pressure at the end of the race. People are fatigued, um, and plus, I mean, probably you're funneling a bunch of people um, towards the finish, so there's going to be overlap between the courses, and you can play with that as well. And yeah, there's an example of my a recent B meet that I did where this is the finale that I prepared for the expert runners. And there was something interesting that Mike said last time, that elite courses should be punishing. And I yeah, that's something that I have found a little bit frustrating sometimes, where um the the there just isn't that much risk, and as a result the courses aren't very punishing. Like you miss, and then there's a catching feature right away, and um whereas when you run in the big competitions in Europe, like you miss, and sometimes you're done. You're in big trouble because you're on the side of a mountain, and there was only one control on the side of the mountain, and it was yours, and you missed it, and there's nobody else there. Um, and so yeah, chasing that experience, um, it's sometimes it's hard to find. Um, but I mean, to be fair to our own community, it's tough to organize like big events like that. So yeah, we have to work with the resources that we have. But um, uh, in that vein, there are a few ways that I try to punish mistakes. And as I mentioned, using gravity to basically gently push people over the threshold, over their threshold of control. And then they just like speed past where they're supposed to go, or whatever. And also playing with visibility. I ran an Oregon course actually where they got me, and I had a really good race going, and the forest actually changed. It was a white open forest, and it changed to still white but low visibility white forest. And it was unmarked on the map, and I saw it coming, and I just dove in. Unprepared. I failed to switch gears, and of course, it was the vegetation changed right as we entered into a side hill. And yeah, it was a huge booby trap, and I went right into it. And I thought it was really clever, and definitely have tried to play tricks, similar tricks in my own courses with that kind of thing. So yeah, identifying changes in vegetation, changes in visibility, and playing with those as a way of punishing mistakes. Very effective. And then, of course, yeah, as I discussed, interactions between courses, um, and but making sure that the flow of the crowd is smooth and there's no telegraphing of the control locations, as discussed. So, with all that information now, um, basically taking all of those ideas of risk management and the um, different ways of increasing challenge, you can go from the bubbles and actually start like planning legs, picking control locations, um, building your route choice legs, and connecting the dots, and then looking for weaknesses, look for yeah, things that are reducing the challenge, reducing the risk. Maybe you picked a control location, but it's like right beside this huge impassable cliff, and that's going to be super obvious. It's like, okay, well, can I find a better spot for that control? That's not going to be telegraphed by this like super obvious attack point. But still finding a place that is going to be out of the sight lines from whatever the direction people are going to approach, just layering up these different ingredients. Um, and and yeah, just iterating until you're sort of happy with the state of your course. And then uh yeah, so as I was talking about, a few other questions to ask, like making sure that the leg is still fair, um and yeah, yeah, the four ingredients: variation, route choice, risk, or pressure. Can I is there a way I can increase any of those, and then iterate? So once you've got your course, it's important then to finish the job. And the getting back to sort of orienteering as a product and looking after your participants and the well-being of your participants. Um, uh, Cropping the lines and circles is an art form that well, I don't think we really talk about it that much, although we certainly complain about it plenty. I try to use, I've taken to using white outlines on my numbers basically all the time now. I think it really helps with the readability. Um, really trying to minimize the important context underneath the circles and lines. Um, Sometimes people will kind of cheat and shrink the numbers. I'm not a huge fan of that. Just move them further away or use a map exchange if you've got a lot of crowding. The numbers are really helpful to avoid mispunches and just like it's supposed to be about the navigation, not about like figuring out how to count to 5 or whatever. Um, so here's a section of the last B meet that I did with cropped lines and circles. When I'm talking about important context, um, I think it's kind of interesting. If you look at some of my croppings here, I'm pretty aggressive with it. Although I tried to keep like a fairly distinct circle, just so that you don't want to get carried away with it, and like you want to be able to. It should still feel like a circle. Um, but like 22, for example, you can see that like there's a big chunk missing in the southwest, and that's just to show that there's a bit of a saddle there. Like it's not just to show the boulders and the cliffs under the circle. Um, it's about the larger context of your control location. Um, so if a runner is running from 21 to 22, for example, the approach is going to be, I mean, either they're going to come from the east, in which case they're going to be going kind of over those little hills, and I think everything is pretty obviously showed on the map from that side. But if they come from if they go west around the uncrossable swamp to 22, and they're coming from the south, there's like a few hills and um the saddle in between the big hill and the small hills, and I wanted that to be like very clear and um visible on the map, and because that's going to be like a line, like a line of approach that most people are going to take, and I want it to be as legible as possible. And yeah, there's a fair bit of nuance in there, so I just clear the space, and I think it makes that control location a lot more intuitive and digestible. Um, Similar ideas with like if you look at 19, for example, I've cropped the circle not because there are any boulders or point objects, but because there's there are shapes, and also that contour line marks a ridge line that I want the runners to know is there, not just for 19, but also because they're going to be running from 22 to 23, and they're going to be dropping off of that ridge. And so I want them to be able to fully read the lay of the land and the formations and know that there's going to be a drop there. And so these are little context cues that I'm taking into account when I'm cropping the circles. And even like if you look at the northeast side of 19, there's a contour line with a tag line, and I've specifically cropped the circle so that they can see that tagline and they know that that contour line is going down on that side, um, which would be a little bit obscured if the circle wasn't cropped there. So, yeah, that's what I mean by context, like a broader context, when you're cropping. And then, yeah, finally, they, um, when it comes to event day, try to hang your flags properly. There's nothing ends as anticlimactic as like having everything perfect and then you get there and the flag is like sitting on the ground or it's hanging off kilter and on some like fallen tree branch and there's a bunch of scrap all over the place and you have to kind of swim your way to the control. Um, um, Keep in mind when you're hanging your flags the sight lines that I've mentioned before. Um, yeah, if you've gone through the trouble of setting a beautiful course, and then you hang the flag so that it's 2 meters in the air, and then just everyone from 50 meters away can see it hanging in the forest, it defeats the whole purpose. Like the the finding the control, it's almost like a game of, it's like you're playing poker. Like you're holding your hand really close as the course setter, and then you're playing back and forth, and then finally the athlete gets to the control site, and then you reveal the hand, and you don't like partially reveal the hand. You show the whole hand, and so when the runner arrives, um, the flag should be obvious, but only once it's time, only once they've gotten to the end of the challenge. Um, and So yeah, I like to clear debris away from my control sites. That's like it takes a bit more time, but um, when I actually like run my course afterwards, it's so nice when you can actually like completely flow through a control site without getting tangled up in like a fallen tree or something. You don't have to move them far because you know where people are going to be coming in from the most part, and you know which direction they're going to be leaving. So just making sure those lines are open. Um, and Yeah, your runners are going to thank you. And One trick for organizers, um, you can load maps and your courses onto your mobile devices now, and you can track yourself as you're putting out the controls. And this is enormously simplifies the task of organizing and like not having to actually navigate when you're putting out the controls and not having to worry about like making a parallel error when you're hanging a flag or getting lost. It just streamlines the whole process and is just improves the quality of life for you as an organizer. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate the energy that you had putting this together and that sort of thing. It took a huge amount of work. Certainly, looking at as we're working on courses for Canadian champs, we'll take a lot of this advice in terms of building that. And I also really appreciate your comments, the section at the end in terms of breaking up those control circles and the line. It's
Mm.
one of those things, like the actual layout of the map, um, of just that going the extra mile in terms of making it perfect for a competition. And you want to think about that early on, I imagine, and not one of those, thinking about it later. Oh, I wish we had done that. We wish we had done that. Those are really excellent things. Um, let's do a few minutes of questions. So you can either raise your hand, you might have that power, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read things out. I had a question, but you kind of covered it in a lot of these examples of whenever I go to the Vancouver Sprint Camp, although it's been ages now since I've gone. I'm always blown away about what great use they can make out of small areas. And I
Oh,
guess
sure.
you covered that in certain areas, that if you're a course setter, you shouldn't be expecting, I can only do a great course if I have, an old school giant map. When you are given like a tiny area, do you kind of do the same things as what you did, just everything shrunken down in proportion, would you say?
Yeah, the process is exactly the same. Just it gets a little more complicated because obviously you're trying to put the course together. The course is kind of like solving a jigsaw puzzle. You've got all these little pieces and you're trying to get them to fit together. But because it's a smaller area now, it's like really tight and you're trying not to kind of have legs sitting on top of each other that are repetitive and stuff like that. So it does make life a little more complicated, but um you can totally do it.
Excellent. I'm just seeing if there's any questions here, which may not have been covered. Um, no, I think so. Call if anyone have a question on this. What's Eric, do you have any specific types of say maps around the Ottawa areas that you really love tackling that? Or if there's maps that you've run in elsewhere in the country that you would love to be able to tackle something there.
Well, I had a lot of fun putting this course together on the it was this is the Eco Wellness Center. It was originally used in the 2010 Canadian Championships or something like that. And so modernizing the map and revitalizing the venue and like really going all out on like a modern map, a modern course, like full on difficulty as hard as I could make it. That was a lot of fun. And it was yeah, it was insane. I ran the course myself, the expert course, and I exhausted myself.
One of the people in Ottawa, I've lived in Ottawa 3 times now, are really spoiled by the quality of the local events. And knowing that like this is a kind of a random Sunday event and you get a really, really well done map, a really well done course, is just awesome. Okay. I don't see any questions here, so you must have, as you said going into it, you're going to be covering a lot, and you must have answered everything up there. If people do have questions, please reach out to Orienteering Ontario. We'll pass things along to Eric for this, and Eric is one of the more approachable people in orienteering. So if you see him at an event, um, please reach out. Chris, I trust you have a question.
Uh, yeah,
Or
well, I see, Chris, you're asking about the line between control 19 and 20 on this course. Yeah, I agree the line's a little bit hard to follow, but that's one of the reasons why the numbers are so important. Um, the the numbers are big and bold and easy to read, and they're so I think even if the line isn't super clear, it's still very clear where the runners need to go next. So that's how I dealt with that particular issue.
Yeah, thanks so much. Uh, it's been just a fantastic webinar, and I, like Nevin said, I really appreciate the fine detail of cropping. I guess I was specifically asking if OCAD or Open Orienteering Mapper allows you to connect, for example, that first segment of the 19 to 20 line to
You could do that, yes,
um, just
absolutely.
not a criticism, just a question. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
I agree
no,
with
that's
you
definitely an option. Yeah,
that if you can see the number 20 quickly, there's no trouble finding where you're
yeah.
supposed to be next. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Tim has a question. Any tips on creating spectator controlled legs in places where the finish area isn't the most exciting compared to the rest of the course?
Yeah, I mean, spectator legs, there's a big discussion about like, oh, are we compromising our sport too much by putting these spectator legs in there? Um, in in my opinion, I mean, if you, I mean, you can use all of the different techniques that I discussed to take a lackluster area and make it as interesting as you can. Um, I know like for the big events, they're not beyond literally like terraforming the landscape. I like at the world champs in Norway, they brought a bulldozer in and just like bulldozed a giant trail, so that there would be like a proper route choice in and out of the arena for the relay distance. They also built a bunch of bridges through this ravine so that people could cross quickly during the middle distance that same year. Um, and I, for B meets and stuff, if there's an area where there aren't any features, but I really want to use that to maybe set up a long leg or a setup leg or something, I'll just build a teepee and add it to the map. And it's somewhat of a signature at this point. And yeah, so I mean, there are creative ways.
Or question for as an M21 runner, okay, say there's a course and there's been a long kind of dead running section in order to craft some kind of spectator control. When you finish that race, how much of the like how much do you think about man leg 4 to 5 or I don't know, like 10 to 11 through the stadium or through the arena was a whole lot of running, not a lot there for the sake of a spectator control. In the course of an entire one, do you feel that made that much of a difference? Or, you know, if the next couple legs are really challenging, it's completely out of your mind?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's you just have to run through those parts as hard as you can, and yeah, I just kind of accept it as it is, and try to deal with the psychological side of it as best as I can. That's probably the scarier part to me, is because the adrenaline is just crazy. So it's it's really intense to run through like a big stadium with thousands of people and stuff. So
Yeah. Dimitri's asked about maybe you reviewing a recent A meet, something like that. Maybe Eric, you can do that and send it to Dimitri or something
right,
like that at
I'll
some
I'll
point
have to I'll have to set up another webinar for that.
down the road.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I think we've reached an end here. So with that, want to give a huge thank you to Eric Kemp for putting this together. This will be posted on Orienteering Ontario and Orienteering Canada's YouTube page. We will be doing more of these throughout the year when the time is right. This is something that Eric approached us. If there's other topics that would be really interesting to explore, we had a huge turnout for this one, but there's other topics like Sport Ident or MapRunF, which might have a smaller number, but the people who could learn a huge amount from it could make a huge difference to their clubs. Want to flag again, this is a busy year for Orienteering Ontario. The Raid the Rib is coming up, don't get lost. And Challenge the Shield by the newest Orienteering club in Ontario, Georgian Nordic. And of course, this summer, TOC, Ottawa, Kingston hosting Canadian champs. Things are well underway in terms of preparation, and we really look forward to welcoming people from the rest of Canada, the US, and anywhere internationally to Ontario this summer. So thanks so much. And the last shout out, thank you so much, Chris, for all the help behind the scenes on this and working with Eric and getting it set up. Chris, who's a incredibly valuable member of the Ontario board. So thank you, everyone. See you in the woods, and really looking forward to the next one of these. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.